10 tons of heavy cargo on my back, 0 weapons in the cabin, and exactly 12 minutes to decide if I die as a supply driver or live as an enemy officer. The media and military manuals will tell you that wars are won by brilliant strategy and crushing firepower. They are lying to you. I was in the Eastern Corridor when the dust rose, and the truth is much darker. That mission wasn't saved by an act of bravery, but by a desperate theatrical performance where every word of mine was the only bulletproof vest I had. That night, I had to become exactly what I hated most just to make it back home. Listen carefully to what I am about to reveal, because this story, the part the government erased from official reports, almost cost me my life. If you have the stomach to know what really happens in the shadows, where the line between hero and traitor vanishes in the radio static, join us and subscribe. Leave a comment if you believe the truth is worth the risk of losing everything. Time is running out, and I won't repeat this twice. Pull your chair closer, my son. That's it. Let the fire between us do its work. Old age is like that. It makes us seek warmth with an urgency the young don't understand, because our blood, over the decades, becomes thin, almost as if it's asking permission to stop flowing. Look at these hands, trembling, stained by time. They don't look like the hands that once mastered 10-ton steering wheels, do they? But the truth is that this body I inhabit today is just an old tent, a thin cloth tent, worn by the sun, with stakes already loose in the ground. And I remember exactly the day the wind blew too hard and my tent began to give way. In those days, everyone called me Axel. I was the logistics man, the guy who carried life on 6 axles, crossing the Eastern Corridor. I prided myself on being invisible. You see, there is a false security in routine. I thought that as long as the engine was roaring and the cargo manifest was signed, I was safe. No one shoots the water driver, I would tell myself, as the smell of diesel and morning-old coffee became my only prayer. I was blind, immersed in the illusion that I had control over every kilometer. It was mission Supply 7. I remember the dim light from the dashboard reflecting on my face, the radio crackling softly with the voices of men I would never see in person. The weight of the cargo on my back felt like the weight of life itself, ammo and water, the sustenance of war. I wasn't a hero, my son. I was just a terrified man hiding behind a laminated badge in a posture of iron. I thought the world was made of orders and deliveries, until the desert decided to show me what a man is made of when the dust rises. The storm didn't come with a warning. It rose like a wall of orange fury, swallowing the horizon. In 1 minute, I could see the brake lights of the truck in front of me. In the next, I was plunged into the vacuum. The windshield creaked under the impact of the gravel, and that sound was as if fate itself were sanding down my very skin. I tried to hold the wheel, tried to stay the course, but the GPS froze. The screen glowed with a silent error, and the radio, which was my umbilical cord to the world of the living, died in aggressive static, a dry scream that seemed to come from the bottom of the abyss. That was when fragility caught up with me. The silence inside the cabin became so dense I could hear the tick-tock of my own fear. I was no longer heading north. I was alone, a metal target lost in contested soil, armed only with a screwdriver and a pile of lies I called duty. I felt a tightening in my chest, not just fear, but a physical pain, as if the air were being stolen by something invisible. My heart, that old engine that never failed me, began to misfire. It beat out of rhythm, thumping against my ribs like a prisoner trying to escape a burning cell. The daylight grew small, like a candle going out in an immense room. I tried to breathe, but the air was sand and remorse. I looked in the rearview mirror and no longer saw the road. I saw only the end. The colors of the world faded to a pale gray, and the sound of the engine, which had always been my guide, became a distant whisper until it vanished completely. In that moment, I knew. The stakes of my tent had been torn out. I was no longer the driver, no longer Axel, no longer anything but a breath losing itself in the immensity. I felt my body grow heavy, a gravity that didn't belong to this world pulling me down, while my vision closed in on a tiny point of light. I closed my eyes, and for a brief moment, time stopped. I was no longer in the cabin. I was slipping out of this world, a silent step toward the unknown, where the sand doesn't burn and fear has no voice. I simply ceased to be. And then, silence. But it wasn't the silence of a broken engine or a radio without batteries, my son. It was a silence that had weight, a silence that felt like a warm hand placed on my shoulder, calming everything that, for 70 years, had screamed inside me. You know that pain? The one I told you about that felt like a hungry beast chewing my chest inside the truck cabin? It simply evaporated. It was as if I had taken off a lead coat I didn't even know I was carrying. Suddenly, I was no longer made of creaking joints, lungs fighting for air, or a failing heart. I felt light, so light that the very idea of gravity seemed like a forgotten joke. I was still there, understand, but not there in the metal, the diesel, and the sand. I looked down and I saw old Axel. I saw that man hunched over the wheel, with a pale face and inert hands. He looked like an empty shell, an old boot left by the side of the road. And the strangest thing, my son, is that I felt no sadness. I felt a deep compassion for that body that had carried me for so long. But I knew, with a clarity that one only has in the purest dreams, that I no longer belonged to that cramped space. The darkness of the sandstorm began to change. It wasn't a sudden flash that hurts the eyes, no. It was as if the dawn decided to be born inside every atom around me. The shadows grew thin, transparent, until the gray gave way to a light I have no words to describe. If I say it was white, I'd be lying. If I say it was golden, that wouldn't be true either. It was a living light, a brightness that didn't come from a sun, but seemed to be the very origin of all life. It didn't illuminate things, it was things. And the sound, oh, the sound. Have you ever heard the roar of a waterfall from far away? Or the wind passing through a field of ripe wheat? It was something like that, but with a harmony that made my being vibrate. It wasn't music from instruments, it was as if the universe itself were breathing in unison. A sound of many waters, but of waters that sang peace. I didn't hear with my ears, I heard with my soul. Each note said, "It's all right, the exhaustion is over." I began to float in that direction, effortlessly, like a dandelion seed carried by a spring breeze. The feeling of security was so absolute that fear that had been my road companion for so many years, seemed like something ridiculous, a shadow that the sun had swallowed. I was diving into an ocean of acceptance. There was no judgment there, only a welcome that echoed without needing voices. The light grew denser, more solid, if you understand me. I was crossing a veil, a border that separates the fleeting from that which never ends. The glow was so intense now that I no longer saw the truck, nor the desert, nor the scars of war. I only saw the infinite. And it was an infinite that smelled of wet earth after rain, the smell of fresh bread on my mother's table, the smell of home. I stopped. Not because there was a wall, but because I felt I had reached the place where time loses its meaning. The peace there was so real I could almost touch it. And it was at that exact moment, as I let myself be enveloped by that glory, that I noticed something that made my new heart race, not with dread, but with a holy awe. I was not alone in that immensity. At the edge of that brightness, where the light seemed to take a form I had known since before I was born, there was a presence that watched me with the patience of ages. And upon feeling that gaze, I knew that everything I had lived up to that point, every curve, every lie, every kilometer of road, was just the preface of a book that was about to be opened. I was before the mystery, and the mystery, he knew my name. And that presence, my son, oh, it wasn't something that could be explained with the tiny words we use at the market or in the workshop. Imagine if all the light of all the stars in the desert were melted into a honey of infinite sweetness. It was like that. It wasn't a flash that blinded, understand? It was a glow that allowed us to see for the first time, to see for real. I didn't see a face like yours or mine, made of flesh and worry. I saw a face made of pure eternity. You know when you spend your whole life trying to prove you are someone? Trying to keep the cargo in place, the truck on the road, the lie intact so you won't be killed? There before him, the weight of that stolen jacket, that uniform of lies I wore out of sheer desperation, all of it simply disintegrated. It was as if the wind took away the dust of a whole life of pretending. He looked at me, and in that look, my son, I didn't find the harsh judge I so feared in my nightmares as a sinful driver. I found the Father I had forgotten to seek. It was an absolute knowing, understand? Without needing to open my mouth, without needing to explain why I was on enemy soil or why I was so afraid. He knew about the grease embedded in my nails. He knew every time I looked away from someone who needed help, so as not to be late for my deliveries. He saw the stains on my soul, the ones that not even time can erase. And you know what was most astonishing? He didn't look away. He didn't feel disgust at my cowardice. On the contrary, it was as if he stepped inside my entire being and wrapped me in an embrace that wasn't of arms, but of pure belonging. I felt accepted, not for what I did, but for what I was before him. A tired son, covered in sand and remorse, who had finally come home. There was no sound of voices, my little one, not like we talk here by the fire. It was a deep knowing, a current of truth that ran between us. Without moving his lips, he showed me something that changed everything I thought about the world. He showed me that my life wasn't about the 10 tons I carried in the truck, nor about the routes I traced on the map. Life was about the secret intention of the heart, about the love we give when we think no one is watching. I understood, in that moment of glory, that all my masks, the tough Axel, the infallible driver, the feigned logistics officer, were just dry husks. Before him, I was just light. A small light, yes, but one that came from the same source as his. I felt all my regrets being washed away, as if a warm rain were removing the crust of diesel and smoke from my soul. I was clean. I was, finally, at peace. I wanted to stay, my son. Oh, how I begged in silence never to have to breathe the heavy air of the earth again. I wanted to dissolve into that presence, to vanish into that goodness that smelled of fresh bread and wet grass after a storm. I no longer felt the body. I no longer felt the desert. I was just a prayer being answered. But then, there came a sweet sadness, a weight that began to pull at my spiritual feet. The presence didn't change, but the message emanating from him became clear as spring water. I felt a, "Not yet, my son." It wasn't a punishment, it was a task, as if he were telling me that my cargo manifest still had blank pages, that there were people who needed to hear that his love is real, even in the midst of the greatest sandstorm. The light began to grow distant, or rather, I began to get heavy again. I felt the cold of the cabin returning to lick my skin. I felt the acrid smell of diesel and the metallic sound of the storm hitting the glass. The gravity of the earth, that old jailer, grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me back into that tired, pale body. I opened my eyes, my son, and what I saw was the truck's steering wheel, trembling hands, and the darkness of the world. But I was no longer the same man. Axel had died in that light, and what remained was someone who had seen the face of God. And now I had to figure out how to live the rest of my life knowing that this world here is just the waiting room for paradise. The return was as if the earth itself were jealous of my soul and decided to pull me by the heel with brute force. I felt a crushing pressure, as if they were trying to shove an entire ocean into a small teacup. That divine lightness, that weightless light, and that infinite knowing, everything was replaced in one blow by a cruel gravity. It was as if I had been forced to wear a coat made of wet lead, a skin that now felt too tight for what I had become. And then, the shock. The first breath I took back on earth was like swallowing crushed glass, my son. My lungs, which moments ago were made of eternal breeze and peace, now burned with the acrid smell of a hospital, that smell of ether, of alcohol, and of a silent fear that always hangs in those white corridors. I heard a beep, an annoying, metallic, mechanical sound that cut through the silence of the room. Beep, beep, beep. It was my heart, that tired, patched-up old clock, trying to find its rhythm again after having stopped counting time. I opened my eyes, but there was no longer the glory of colors that don't exist here. There was only the cold white light of a fluorescent lamp flickering on the ceiling, buzzing like a dying insect. I saw faces, doctors, nurses, pale faces full of an astonishment they tried to hide behind masks. They looked at me as if they had seen a ghost, and in a way, they were right. The man they brought back to that bed of rough sheets was not the same Axel who had departed in the middle of the storm. The density of this world, it hurts, you know? I felt the weight of my arms on the mattress, the accumulated exhaustion of decades of sleepless roads, the pain in joints I didn't even remember I possessed. Everything came back at once, like a poorly tied load that topples over the driver on a sharp turn. But in the midst of that physical pain, that feeling of being trapped in an armor of flesh and bone, there was a secret that shone in here, right in the center of my chest. I now had the seal of eternity marked on my soul. After that day, the fear of death simply packed its bags and left my life. How can one be afraid of the door that leads to the Father's house? We spend our entire existence running from an end that is actually the beginning of everything that matters. I looked at the people in the streets, with their vain hurries, their fights for crumbs of power, their masks of importance, and I felt an immense urge to hug each one of them and whisper, "Let it go. That isn't the load you're going to carry on the final manifest." My vision of life changed completely, my little one. The tough Axel, that driver who needed to be a logistics hero to hide his own dread, died in that hospital. I understood that we are not what we carry on our shoulders, but what we give for free with open hands. I understood that forgiveness is not a favor we do for another, but the necessary cleaning of our own truck so that the flight is lighter when the time for final departure arrives. Now, look closely at this old man telling you these things here by the fire. The glow of the embers is fading, isn't it? And my time to cross the border again, this time to stay, approaches with every beat of my heart. But I'm in no hurry, and much less am I afraid. I'm just waiting for the green light from the great commander. And you who listen to me with such attentive eyes, listen well to what this old driver has to tell you before the flames go out. Life here is a breath, a short journey between two sandstorms. Don't waste your precious time holding on to grudges, nor trying to be a mask to please a world that doesn't know you. Lies weigh too much when it's time to go up, and there in the light, they are useless. They disintegrate before you even reach the gate. Love. Love with an urgency that frightens others. Forgive this very day, before the sun sets, because we never know when the engine will give its last beat and the radio will go silent. Don't carry hate in your truck. That is toxic cargo, my son. It corrodes the metal of the soul and keeps you stuck to the ground. Treat every soul that crosses your path as if it were a glimpse of that light I saw, because deep down, it is. Don't be afraid of tomorrow, nor of the sharp turns the road presents to you. The Father who received me with that embrace of absolute peace, He is taking care of every kilometer of your route too. Even when the dust rises and you can't see an inch in front of your nose, remember what I tell you now. You are never, ever driving alone. Feel this peace I am feeling now. Let it calm your restless heart. Heaven is not a place far from here, hidden behind the clouds. It is a state of being that we begin to cultivate now, in the way we forgive, in the way we reach out. Go in peace, my son. Follow your journey with a clean heart and a cargo manifest full of acts of kindness. And know, with all the certainty of this world and the next, that the end of the journey is much, much more beautiful than anything you ever dared to dream. Stay with God, and may His light illuminate your path, today and forever. Amen.